gremlins! I have once again turned to a random aesthetic generator and Pinterest to find some interesting images, with plans to turn these images into characters, specifically a queer couple, because it's Pride Month. Not that it needs to be Pride Month for me to do this, since last time I turned images into characters I made them lesbians. Unlike last time I did this, it took a lot more attempts to find images that spoke to me. I think I spent about 5 minutes, which I sped up here, switching between the aesthetic generator and Pinterest to find images that I liked, had enough details in them to turn into characters, and looked like they'd fit well together. Finally, I landed on an image of a beetle collection with many colors and shiny beetles, and an image of pale mushroom clusters growing on the roots of a tree. Since the last time I turned images into a couple, I made the couple lesbians, I decided to switch things up this time and make the characters queer in a completely different way. I also made things easier for myself and only drew one pose of the two together. The one based on the bugs is lounging against the shoulder of the one based on mushrooms, and I'm really happy with the pose dynamics, especially since this was my first try at a pose and I wasn't using references. Once again, I need to come up with names for these characters to make referring to them easier. I've decided that both of these characters are trans, and so I chose their own names, giving me a little bit more liberty to be creative, since these don't need to be names a parent would give a baby. The character based on bugs chose the name Campy, and the character based on the forest floor is named Theo. Campy chose their name based on the Mollencampy beetle, which looks like this. Thank you, Bearded Gremlin, for helping me think of insect-related names. Once I had the basic sketch of each character's pose, I started working on deciding what elements of the photograph would become part of each character's design. I started with Campy, who I decided would be wearing very eclectic and chaotic clothing to match the busy energy of the insect photograph. I put actual bugs into their outfit in multiple places. They have beetle-shaped pins on their flannel, beetles painted on the patches of their pants, and a beetle earring. Right from the beginning, I knew this character would be very into insects. Theo's design is a little simpler. He has a cropped t-shirt with a graphic of mushrooms based on the mushrooms on his photograph, layered over a plain long sleeve and paired with simple ripped jeans and canvas shoes. I struggled to figure out what to do with his hair the most, eventually deciding to give him locks. The line art on this image took a while, especially when drawing Campy, since their design has so many small details, including lots of details that I used colored line art on a separate layer to the black so I could recolor it later. My canvas resolution was slightly different to normal for this drawing, so I couldn't use my normal brush sizes, which appeared a lot thinner in this drawing. My Photoshop has been a bit weird lately when creating new images, and I think that when I updated the dimensions of my canvas to be A4 sized, the size that I normally work at, it didn't automatically update the resolution. When I first pasted my photos into the document, they looked very low res, which I realized was because my document was like 20 pixels per inch. I think I overcorrected though when I fixed the resolution. All that to say, my brushes are larger than I normally work with so that the line art looks the same weight as it normally does. As I mentioned near the start of this voiceover, both Campy and Theo are trans. Campy is non-binary and uses they-them pronouns. They are also autistic. Shocking, I know, their obsession with beetles doesn't point to that at all. This is sarcasm. And I gave them a cane. No, this isn't a self-insert character. It's my friend the Bearded Gremlin who's really into insects, not me, which is why I turned to him to help me name the insect-obsessed character. I'm just every other character trait of Campy's. Campy is wearing corduroy overalls covered in beetle patches, under an open flannel decorated with pins, and over a plain t-shirt. They also have boots with laces threaded with colorful beads and lots of colorful, chunky jewelry, which also looks vaguely beetle-like. The beetles on Campy's pants are traced directly from my photo. I know one of them is a stag beetle, but I'm not sure about the others. By the end of the line art, I was rushing just a bit, so the texture on Campy's corduroy overalls is a little messy. I think it'll be fine though. It's a very fine texture that just barely shows up when the overalls are colored, but some of the lines are either too close together or too spaced apart. I moved on to Theo's line art next, which is a lot simpler to do. Theo is a lot less maximalist. He's trans, like Campy, but not non-binary. Theo is a trans man using he/him pronouns. He's also alternative, not full-on punk or goth, but into alternative music and fashion, with several facial piercings, and although you can't see them under his long sleeve, he is definitely in the process of getting his arms covered in tattoos. Theo used to think he was a lesbian, but after starting his transition in university, he realized he was both bi and falling for his best friend, Campy, who is in his environmental science class. Theo is very into nature and science. It's part of what drew the couple together in the first place. However, Theo is also very into folklore and mythology. If these two ended up in a story together, it would be an urban fantasy story, where on a nature walk where both neurodivergent characters are barely getting anywhere with the amount of time they are spending getting overly excited about insects, mushrooms, and moss, stumble upon some very bug-like fairies. Between Theo's knowledge of folklore and Campy's knowledge of insects, the two are able to help the fairies, and suddenly, they're seeing fairies in Chrysalis everywhere. Suddenly, their shared apartment is full of terrariums for injured fae folk, and between classes, they're scribbling down notes and collecting crickets and nectar for the fairies to eat. Like I always do when turning random photographs into characters, I'm color picking directly from the photo for each of the characters' designs. Again, I'm starting with Campy. Partly it's because Campy is overlapping in front of Theo, but mostly it's because Campy's design will take a lot more time, and I want to make sure I get it done before I start getting impatient with the project. While there are a lot of very colorful insects in the photograph, generally the colors are very warm-toned, with a lot of orange, brown, and green, which makes the color palette fairly unified. Also, something about the photograph, either the quality of the camera or a filter used on it, makes all the darkest points a dark green rather than a proper black, so a lot of the darks in Campy's design, like their boots, will be dark green as well. Usually, I start with jewelry and small details before moving on to larger chunks of color, but since there are so many small details in this design, I decided to instead start with the overalls and warm up to the challenge. Campy's overalls are brown with brassy clips that match the iridescent brassy color of some of the Beatles' elytra. In fact, all of Campy's jewelry is that brassy gold color. From the overalls, I moved on to the shoes, and created a small palette of colors to use for the laces and beads, based on the colors of some of the more simple Beatles. The beads are all green, red, or orange, and the laces pale yellow to contrast with the dark boots. Campy would have decorated the laces themselves. The boots didn't originally come with pale yellow laces. Warmed up now, I began the challenge of the Beatle pins on Campy's flannel. I decided to match some of the iridescent Beatles in the photo as close as I could, which was really fun actually. I used a soft brush to add colourful highlights in yellow and orange on a dark green base, and each Beatle pin is unique. There's also a lone trans pin among the iridescents, and even the trans colours are picked from the photograph, which is why the blue is a little more teal than a proper baby blue. With the pins coloured, I moved on to the necklace, which, like the beads on Campy's shoelaces, are each colour picked from a simpler, not shiny Beatle. The necklace is handmade, and Campy used the same multi-pack of coloured wooden beads for it and the boots, so they go well together. One of Campy's ways of stimming is to make things with their hands. Hello, another self-insert trait. They made all the patches on their pants, which are hand-sewn and hand-painted, and they like making beaded accessories and jewellery. The Beatle pins aren't homemade, they're from a small business, and Theo bought them for Campy as a gift when they were still just friends. As well as the crafts visible in Campy's outfit, Campy also doodles and draws a lot in a mini sketchbook that fits in their pocket. Most of the time they draw insects, either from memory or ones they see. However, they also draw book characters, monsters, mushrooms, and fancy lettering. At first I coloured Campy's flannel dark green, but that made the Beatle pins harder to see and just felt a bit too overpowering, so I ended up recolouring it to the cream colour of the photo background. I tried using the dark green for Campy's t-shirt instead, but that also eventually got lightened. I knew from the sketch that I wanted Campy's hair to be dyed and the roots to be growing out, but it wasn't until right as I started colouring that I knew what colour it should be. I thought it might take a few tries to land on a good colour, but honestly my first choice, a dark muted green, was correct. Finally, I gave them pale skin, coloured their cane brown, and gave them golden eyes with a bit of smudgy eye makeup around them. Then I got to start colouring Theo. The colour palette of Theo's photo is a lot simpler than Campy's. It's almost all greens and browns. I started with Theo's shirt, matching the mushrooms to the actual mushroom of the photo, making the mushroom's background dark, and the rest of the shirt a light muted green. Theo is also autistic, but has ADHD as well. Most of the time, that meshes really well with Campy, although sometimes it clashes in a way that causes absolute chaos and destruction. Theo is a year older than Campy, but they started university at the same time. They were friends by the end of the first week. Theo caught feelings within a few months, but tried to keep it to himself. Everyone else in their friend group knew, but Campy was completely oblivious until Theo finally told them late one night, unplanned. They were dating almost right away. Theo isn't an artist in the same way Campy is, but he is a writer and an avid reader. His interest in mythology and folklore started as a young kid who spent time in the library instead of around other people, hyper-focusing on books, both fact and fiction. He's been writing since high school, mostly using it as an outlet for a few really rough years. Now his writing is a lot happier, although he still puts his characters through plenty of trauma. Before they suddenly ended up extremely busy with a fairy situation, Theo and Campy spent a lot of time in each other's presence doing completely separate activities. Campy would listen to an audiobook or music or a 6-hour video essay while hand-sewing or drawing, and Theo would read or type away at a novel he's been trying to write for 2 years, or actually try studying for once. Now there isn't nearly as much time for that. Instead, Theo is outside trapping tiny grasshoppers in an empty peanut butter jar, and Campy is drawing scientific illustrations of strange, bug-like humanoids in a secondhand snake tank. I'm not sure where this fairy situation idea came from. It certainly wasn't on my mind when I was actually drawing these characters, but I love it so much that I've completely forgotten to mention more details of the colouring process of Theo. Quickly, I made his long sleeves the dark brown of the shadows, his ripped greens are the grey of the exposed wood, and his shoes are moss green with dirty laces and soles the colour of the mushrooms. Where Campy's jewellery is brassy gold, Theo's is tarnished silver. His hair and eyes are the same dark brown, nearly black, of the shadows, and his skin is brown like the leaves on the forest floor. Like the last time I did a couple's image based on photographs, I'm doing a slightly different shading style to my normal. Instead of messily blocking in the shading and blending it out to be smooth, I'm doing cell shading that remains sharp and unblended, but also means I need to be a lot more intentional with the shapes of my shadows. I really like when I get a chance to shade like this. I think it looks really nice, crisp and stylized. Often, I'll shade with a muted purple or blue, but due to the very foresty colour palette of both characters here, I decided to shade with brown instead. I finished the image by adding a bit of a vignette to the edges, leaving the background a blank light brown but for the shadows under the characters to ground them. And here is the final image. I had so much fun with these characters. I love both of their designs so much, and I also love the little urban fantasy situation I created for them on the fly. Have a safe Pride Month, everyone. Things look really scary right now, but I hope this video could be a little break from the chaos. Until next time, bye! The character based on the bugs chose the name Campy. Is this Mullen Campy or Mullen Campy? I should probably know this. Hello, Google Translate? Ah, I can't listen to Google Translate because the microphone is plugged in. I'm just gonna have to give this my best shot. Campy, 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 Campy. Mullen campy, Mullen compy. Campy.